Thanks for sharing this time. We're going to have a conversation here with the Christian Life Commission. I'm Ferrell Foster.
I'm Caleb Sever.
Where are you from, Caleb?
I'm from Waco, Texas, so just about an hour and a half down the road.
Okay, so you know we're in Austin. We're not too far away. I'm from Dallas, but we work here together with the Christian Life Commission. Caleb has written a really interesting piece that's on our website, on the Christian Life Commission, and it's called More Than Meets the Eye. What is it about, Caleb?
Man, well, it's not a light topic.
No, it's not.
It's about the linkage between the sexual assaults that have been in the news and the media so consistently in the last couple months and pornography and how pervasive that is.
I haven't heard others saying that.
Yeah, well,
So
that
that's
was one of the reasons that I wrote it. Was I was reading in the news, and I'm getting my master's in public policy right now, and so obviously we're talking about these issues all the time. And I noticed in the midst of all the frustration, and rightfully so, and and a lot of name calling and pointing and all these different things, I thought, I think that there is kind of an underlying evil here that we're turning a blind eye to. Maybe because we're not thinking about it, maybe because it's easier to ignore. But even in undergrad, knowing how pervasive this is, not just among young people, but both in the secular world, in the church, sadly, I wanted to address it.
Now, you call this an evil, and you say people are struggling with it.
Sure.
But yet, I think one of the things in your article, you use some statistics that this is really pervasive. This is everywhere. Can you recall some of those stats about just how widely used this is?
Sure. One of the statistics that really stuck out to me was I was looking through different polls that people have done. There's a lot of advocacy groups out there trying to bring some awareness to this issue. And one that came up was this poll. They polled about 1,500 different young people, and they found that 79% of young men, so that's ages 18 to 30, and around 32%, I believe, of young women were saying that they looked at pornography at least once a month. And there were several more than that said that they looked at it on a more consistent basis. But I think that statistic specifically kind of opened my eyes. If I was like, I knew that this was pervasive, but wow, that is a significant majority. So those statistics, but I think the ones that really stuck with me were the linkage. There's a great nonprofit called Fight the New Drug that has really been working for several years to get some awareness out there about pornography. And they really talk about the linkage between pornography, not just addiction, but even just viewership, with sexual assaults, with sex trafficking, and a lot of that industry. And how all of those things really tie together a lot closer than we think. So one of the statistics that's in the article is talks about they did an analysis of a lot of these pornographic movies that are pretty popular, and they found that a vast majority of them had sexual assaults linked together with violence in the same scene. So I think the average, they said, was about 12 acts of violence in every pornographic scene in each of these movies. And they were using that linkage to show, hey, these aren't isolated issues. They too often go hand in hand.
I think that's something that might surprise people who are not in that world of the fact that so much violence is a part. It's not just sex.
Sure. It's violent sex.
Yeah. And we as a culture have kind of we've connected the two, and not just in what we call kind of the underground pornography, but in even a popular movie like 50 Shades of Grey.
Sure. Well, and even medically, we shouldn't be surprised. And I think that's something, coming from a Christian worldview, obviously the Bible has some clear things to say about lust and all of these issues. So I knew that it was something that wasn't good for us. But I think when you look at how the medicine and the science all backs this up, one of the statistics that really stuck with me was it talked about how just like other addictions, pornography addiction has it kind of structurally rewires your brain. So the frontal lobe of your brain is the specific part of your brain that has to do with logical decision making, among other things. And they did all these studies that people that looked at pornography consistently, that part of their brain had shrunk. The same thing with gray matter, which is, again, I'm not a neurologist, but the gist of it is all of these functions or structures associated with decision making eroded as a result of pornography. So I'm like, are we really surprised if logical decision-making capacity is going down? that the result would be that people would do things that most people would say they regret afterwards, for sure.
Caleb, I saw in the article you talked about the objectification of women. What does that mean? I mean, we hear that phrase.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that, to me, that was one of the linkages, or the strongest linkages, if you will, between pornography and these assault cases or abuse cases that we're seeing. But essentially, objectification of anybody is viewing them as an object to be used rather than an individual or something of value outside of maybe their use or to me. And I think that is a real similarity between pornography and looking at something on a screen that is a human being. Behind the screen, behind all these different things, it's somebody. And to view them as an object to be used rather than as an individual, it's really similar to how these abuse cases take place.
Some people, I think, would say, hey, well, that's just boys being boys. They're going to be that way. What would you say to them, especially for Christian boys in that environment?
You know, I think part of it is, I mean, as believers, we're trying to follow a biblical standard. You know, Jesus set a pretty high standard when he talked about if you just look at somebody, it's like, with a lustful intent, it's like you've committed adultery with them, which really upped the bar from what the bar had been in the past.
That's right.
So I think if our goal is to be believers that reflect Jesus, then we have to take this stuff seriously. And I think that's, you know, it's kind of a pass. And I've never been a parent, but I'll say at least for my parents and the way that they parented my family, I'm so thankful that they didn't just say, well, boys will be boys when I said things that were inappropriate or did things or whatever. I'm thankful that they stepped in there and said, hey, that isn't who we are as a family. And as believers, as followers of Jesus, you know, so I think, I think that it's an easy cop-out to say this is just part of life, but if we're trying to be like Jesus, then we have to step into those places and call it
I
out.
think that's great. I'm so thankful for your parents.
Yeah.
You know, it just hit me. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I hear the phrase "girls will be girls."
Yeah.
You know, so why do we give boys a pass?
Yeah.
But it seems like our culture has. Maybe that's one of the things. Maybe that can begin to change, because actually what we know from recent revelations is it's not just boys being boys; it's men being boys.
Yeah.
Men acting like, immature adolescents and taking advantage of women. And you wonder if it didn't just start back there, and it's just boys will be boys, even into adulthood.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, Caleb, but at the end of your article, you actually asked if you could add a part about a word to those who are caught in that in that world, because we don't. Most young men are, and I think probably most middle age and older, and a lot of the older men are as well.
Sure.
What was that word you shared?
Yeah, I tried to just extend some hope. I mean, I think it's so easy. You can read an article like I wrote and think, well, okay, it's obviously wrong, but a lot of people know it's wrong. You can't get out of it.
Yeah.
And I think when I look at the Bible, when I look at the power of God that Jesus promises so clearly to believers, I think this thing has to be doable. We have to be able to live free lives. You know, it's not just a carrot out there that we can never actually grab. It's we actually can do this. And so one of the things I said, there's a scripture in 1 John where it says, walk in the light as he is in the light, and then we will have fellowship with one another. And I love that scripture because I think the big grab of pornography is when people keep it in the dark, when they've struggled with it or they feel the shame, and it's easier to cover it up or not say anything. And I think that's where it still has power. But when we bring it to the light and we get the forgiveness of God for it, I think it gives us the power to be able to say no moving forward. So I think that's one of the things that I try to encourage people to do is bring to the light. You know, be vulnerable, share that with somebody. And another thing that at least I've noticed is that the enemy would always want to isolate people and make them think, hey, you're the only one dealing with this, or this is way worse than anyone else deals with it. And I just think that's a lot.
Coveting, or coupled here. You referenced earlier about, you've heard that it said, you shall not commit adultery. Sure. But I say to you, this is Jesus talking, that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I mean, like you said, high bar. And then you can go back into Exodus to the Ten Commandments. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. I think you could very easily go, that this is also not just about your neighbor's wife.
Yeah.
Coveting, wanting to possess an imaginary or a fictional, person through pornography, or another person. It's sin against God.
What I love about all those scriptures, and I think the Bible does this so consistently, is it attacks the root of things. You look at what Jesus said about this. He wasn't just interested in surface level. It was always, hey, let's go a little bit deeper. It's not just adultery, it's lust. It's not just don't steal your neighbor's ox, but don't even covet your neighbor's ox, and or what have you. And I think that I love how the Bible does that, and I think it's a lesson that we can learn with these abuses and assaults that we see is we can treat the outward expression of things that are happening and rightfully condemn it for the terrible thing that it is. Yeah. But until we go at the root, that stuff isn't really going to be solved.
That's a great word, getting at the root of it.
The honor and respect.
And what is that phrase you use about moving toward?
Sure. I always say we don't drift toward righteousness.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's going to take intentionality. There's a pull, obviously, toward living unrighteously, toward objectifying people, toward all these different things. But we have this opportunity to say, not on our watch.
We really do. One of the things I find myself hoping as we talk is that we get down the road a few years and we start to see those numbers are pulling back.
Yes.
Of pornographic usage, but also that we start to hear less and less of women being victimized in the workplace and in our culture. That we can see both of these unacceptable kinds of behaviors pulling back, and it's not going to just happen. It's not going to happen by government decree. It's not going to happen just by a sermon. It's going to happen by a whole lot of followers of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And people who want to love their neighbors as themselves. Actively moving in that direction.
Absolutely.
So you're helping us to do that, Caleb.
Wow, thanks.
And we appreciate that. That's really, the Christian Life Commission wants to be an organization that comes alongside of Christians to help them to follow Jesus more closely in our day-to-day lives. Jesus didn't call us just to be saved. He called us to be His disciples. And as we are His disciples, to seek to make other disciples as well. And quite frankly, I think as other people see that we're different, they're going to want to say, what's different about Caleb or Ferrell? We want to be that. And what they'll find is it's not us, it's Jesus. We want to lift up Jesus.